This is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Well, hello everybody, this is Hal.
And this is Melanie.
And we want to welcome you to another episode of Making Biblical Family Life Practical. And this is going to be really practical because we're talking about learning, we're talking about struggling learning, and we're talking about a parent's natural desire that they don't want to stick their children in a label. We have this conversation. We've struggled with this ourselves.
We have, and we have this conversation all the time. It happened yesterday at church, Hal.
Okay.
So a friend of mine was telling me about her situation. She has a high school student who's a struggling learner. She knows he has learning disabilities, and he's succeeding in high school, but he still needs some accommodations. And I said, well, what does he want to do for a living? And she said, well, he wants to go to college. He wants to study this and that. And I said, then you need to have him tested. You need to have him formally tested. And she said, but that's not a good thing to get him a label, is it? I don't want him to be labeled. And, I thought back, Hal, to when we had a struggling learner. And it was a lot earlier in our homeschool career, and he wasn't learning to read. Our older kids, you remember, they learned to read really early.
They were precocious readers.
Right.
And we thought, oh, great. Homeschooling is great, and our kids are brilliant, and we're wonderful, and everything's swell. And then God gave us this wonderful child who just struggled in that area. And we just thought, what's wrong? What's wrong?
Well, I couldn't wrap my head around it because I knew that he was just as smart as his brothers.
Yeah.
He talked as well as they did. I couldn't, when someone said special needs or learning disabilities, I was picturing something that I didn't think he could be. Yeah. And I had heard so much about the dangers of labeling children. And
well, we came up in the traditional school system, and that kids got labeled. Sometimes got labeled by their peers, but sometimes they got labeled by the system, and that did change things. It changed things socially. It changed things academically for them. And so I can understand a lot of parents would say, I don't want my child to have this thing hung around his neck.
Well, I can understand that. My brother had a horrible time in school. He was... I remember a 7th grade teacher who thought she had me in her class, and 2 years later she got my brother, and she was sure he was just lazy. So she thought she would break him of it by mocking him in front of the class and having him read aloud and spell in front of the class and then making fun of him when he couldn't. It took me years to forgive that woman. But I can understand that fear of having your child labeled, of wondering, is this going to limit their future? Will people treat them the same way? Will they have the same opportunities? I was scared about that, Al. I didn't want my child labeled special needs. I didn't want him labeled with something that may be like a millstone around his neck. I knew he was smart. I knew he could be successful. And I was worried about it.
Yeah. And like you said, the label that you thought was out there didn't match in your, what you got in your mind's eye when you heard that didn't describe our son.
Right.
And you thought, I don't want him, lumped into that and people making that assumption when it's just not true.
And I didn't want him to feel like he couldn't succeed.
Right.
And so really, you know what? I waited too long, Hal.
Okay.
I waited too long to have him tested because I kept thinking, well, surely he'll get it next month. Surely he'll get it next year. And, he wasn't learning to read. And I was just afraid of this whole system thing.
Yeah.
What I didn't know is that there is a time that labels are useful. And that there's a way to get your child the help they need. There are a bunch of different ways without putting them in any kind of system.
Well, and I think, too, the things we think about that make us hesitant about this whole label thing, is when the labels get stamped onto a person versus a label of a diagnosis. When somebody, has a challenge, a condition, an illness, or whatever it is, when somebody can identify it and say, all right, we know how to deal with this. Here's the hope that we can offer you because now we know what we're working with. And that doesn't impact their person, but rather just simply to say, hey, you're more than a category to us. And so, we shouldn't use that thing, particularly as homeschoolers, because, so much of that was social, I think. And the fact that we're homeschoolers, we have an entirely different social milieu.
Well, and see, nobody even has to know about it. Look, let's tell the story of our situation with our child.
Okay.
And then let's talk about when you need extra help with a struggling learner early in their career, midway, and high school, and how getting help or getting testing can help at those different ages.
Well, I guess the first thing with ours is that he had older brothers who actually read early. They were precocious readers, and it came very easily for them.
Yeah.
And so when his turn came, when he reached that age, he didn't take to it like a duck to water. And we thought, well, okay, maybe his timetable's a little different. And then I remember it was very intermittent. It wasn't like he totally wasn't learning something, but it was like he seemed to know something one day and then maybe not know it the next day, and we couldn't figure this out.
Well, see, that's what got me. That's what I was really afraid of. That, that's what confused me. I thought he was just not serious about it, or he was old soldiering, or he was too hyper, because he's definitely hyper.
Oh, well, that he is, yeah.
And, because one day it seems like he could sound out the word perfectly well.
Right.
And the next day it was like he'd never seen the letters before.
And he'd say, oh, my head hurts.
Yeah,
or
my stomach hurts.
My stomach hurts. Or,
I did not realize that was very, very normal for someone who's struggling with dyslexia.
That was very symptomatic.
Yes.
But we didn't know what the symptoms were.
I didn't know. And, because of that, I kept trying phonics program after phonics program, and finally decided, out of complete terror and franticness, that I had to have him tested, that I had to find out what was going on. And so I contacted an educational psychologist, and I had him tested. And you know what was really interesting?
Well, I can think of a lot of things. What did you want to bring up?
Well, the utter relief that I felt when I knew what was going on.
And not just you.
Not just me. Because you know what? I had decided before we had him tested that I was not going to tell him the results. Because I didn't want him to feel like he was limited. I wanted him to feel like he could do anything, that God called him to do. And I didn't want to tell him.
Yeah. But
when I got the results back, he absolutely begged me to tell him.
He put his foot down. How old was he at the time?
I'm trying to figure that out right now while we're talking. But he wanted to know. He wanted to know what the results were.
Just kind of give it to me straight.
Yeah, and I didn't know what to do, Hal.
Yeah.
I didn't want him to feel labeled. I didn't want him to feel like he was less than his brothers. But finally, I just felt like, okay, well, I'll just tell him. And I sat him down with the results, and I showed him that his IQ was actually extremely high.
Right.
Very high, like, over 95th percentile. Way high. And his performance on some standards was 2nd percentile.
Like, it was all or nothing.
Yes. And, I was a little bit discouraged by those results because it seemed like, this huge mountain, that we wouldn't be able to overcome. But, because 2nd percentile, I mean, that means that all those potheads at the high school were higher level,
Well, I remember looking at the bar graphs showing the performance on the different sections of the tests that he had took. taken, and it was like a comb with a tooth missing.
Yeah.
It was something that it was, everything looked strong, everything was really above average, and then there was one or two things that he had a struggle with that were just like missing teeth.
Yeah.
And it was remarkable because he looked at it and says, "Oh, now I see what the problem is," and it really seemed to comfort him because it was, I think when we have a problem, whether it's I'm struggling to learn how to read or a problem in my life as a grown-up, I think when we have a problem, it expands and fills up our brain, and it overwhelms us. Sometimes you feel like my whole world is focused on this one bad tooth or whatever it is, and then when you get relief, when you find some hope, when there's something that says, no, you only have this one little problem. Everything isn't bad. You have one thing.
Yeah.
Now let's go find a solution. And that's really what he seemed to feel. He really seemed to feel like, oh, okay. So this says I'm smart everywhere else. I just have this one little processing issue.
He was totally relieved.
Yeah.
It
amazing.
Shocked me because I expected almost anything but that. But he was totally relieved because he felt like, okay, I am smart. I have ability, but I have this challenge. Hey, I can deal with challenges. That was his attitude.
Yeah. So
I ended up telling him. He was utterly relieved. I was relieved because we had some direction.
Yeah.
We knew some things to do. And, that's when, it wasn't long after that I discovered Diane Craft's materials, which were a huge help to us.
We actually heard her speak at a conference, I remember.
Yeah.
And you had a long conversation with her after the workshop she presented.
It was the first time I heard anybody talk about reading difficulties that made any sense with what I'd seen in with Samuel.
Yeah.
And so, we ordered her materials and we got them home, and I was desperate, Hal.
Sure.
I was desperate. And so I said, okay, we're going to do this stuff. We did the brain integration therapy manual.
Yeah.
Which has these crazy exercises and stuff that seem really silly.
Well, do you want to just give a real snapshot what that means? I mean,
a lot of kids struggle with reading and writing.
Mm-hmm.
And they have trouble switching back and forth between left brain and right brain.
Yeah.
Because part of the task is done on the right-hand side of the brain and part of the task is done on the left-hand side of the brain.
Right. And
like
so
if I'm trying to read, I look at a symbol, left-hand side of the brain.
Yeah.
And then that reminds me of a sound, right-hand side of the brain.
Right. And so, yeah, and if you remember that, I mean, you think about it, the left brain is more of the logical, rational processing side, and the right brain is more the creative, feeling, artistic, sensory type of side. And
they're having to switch back and forth,
right.
And if a child cannot easily switch them back and forth between the right side of the brain and the left side of the brain, it's hard. Now, it makes some things easier.
Yeah.
These kids tend to be really good at art and sculpture and thinking outside the box, but they struggle with learning in the traditional way. So anyway, it had these exercises that Sam did not want to do.
Yeah.
And he thought it was baby stuff. He got really angry, and I just made him. I said, we're going to do it. And we did it every day for a year, and that year he learned how to read.
Now, do you recall when that year was, about what grade that was?
Yeah, he was 11, I think, when he learned how to read.
Which, okay, be honest, that's
pretty late.
Well, not only that, but that's a difficult time.
It's a difficult time,
for anybody. And so, to say, let's do something that is going to make you feel self-conscious. And for an 11-year-old, that's... Yeah, that would have been good if you'd started a couple of years earlier, probably. But... I mean, and it made a difference, and that was really the turning point for us, and for him.
Well, it was, and it was amazing once he learned how to read, because he went from reading on a first grade level at 10 to reading on an adult level at 13. And and I was so encouraged in it, but he was still really struggling with reading and writing. Mm-hmm. So 8th or 9th grade, thereabouts, I thought, okay, I've got to find out what to do now. We're going to high school, and I'm tested again. Mm-hmm. And I'm really glad I did, because that testing led to him being able to get accommodations in on the SAT and the ACT.
Yeah.
And accommodations in college, because yes, he's in college now. In fact, he's in college with the scholarship that the top scholarship for entering freshmen is college. Top academic scholarship.
And this is the one who didn't really learn to read until he was 11.
Yes, and he's making A's at college.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you what.
But he does get accommodations. He gets some help. So let's
why don't we take a break here, and we're going to have a word about our sponsor, and then we're going to talk about just what that meant, getting accommodations, and what a difference that can make.
Well, let's talk about when do you need to get when do you need to get testing? When do you need to do accommodations? When do you need to get help for your kids?
Okay. Well, we'll be right back. But first, a word from our sponsor. Well, we want to talk a little bit about our sponsor, schoolhouseteachers.com.
One of the things I like about Schoolhouse Teachers is the planners.
Oh, those come with it free, don't they?
Yeah, you can download all the planners. There's the Hey Mama planner, which I love because it has the sweet essays from Gina Suarez, who's just so encouraging. God has given her the gift of encouragement.
Oh, yeah.
But it also has planners that your kids can use to help them plan their schoolwork. It has...
Oh, and that's a skill they need to learn.
Oh, yeah. It has all kinds of things. There's chore charts. There's custom planners. And there's even a special learners planner, Hal.
Is there?
Yeah, that has articles from special needs experts. Mm-hmm. It has planning pages. It helps you write an IEP, and it has medical and therapy forms and all kinds of things like that too.
Wow.
And it all comes with your Schoolhouse planner on top of 270 courses it's up to now?
Oodles and oodles.
Yeah.
K through 12. I mean, all sorts of great stuff.
So much stuff.
So one low price for the whole family for as many courses as you want to take. It's so one low price per month.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, Schoolhouse Teachers is so awesome, and it's cheaper than going to Starbucks a couple of times a month.
That's right. Okay, so schoolhouseteachers.com. Come out to the show page at halandmelanie.com/radio.
Yes.
Okay, so we're talking about struggling learners and accommodations, because we've already dismissed with the label thing.
Well, we talked about our kids.
Yeah.
Generally.
Yep.
If you notice that your child is struggling to the point that they're not just like a year out of sync with other kids, but they're a couple or 3 years out of sync,
mm-hmm.
and you're getting to third grade or so, and they're not learning how to read, you probably need to seek some additional help.
Yeah.
You need to get some advice. It's a good idea to get testing,
mm-hmm.
because I know when we applied for accommodations on the SAT, they asked us when they had first been tested, because a lot of people, I gather, that sometimes people who have a lot of money try to get their child labeled in high school so that they can get accommodations.
So in other words, okay. So
when they don't really need them.
Well, maybe to explain this for a bit.
Okay.
Okay. Because so many kids that are struggling learners have like one issue.
Yeah.
But it's a critical issue. It's a dyslexia type of thing. They don't have like a mental disability or developmental thing, but it's just this one problem that's interfering with them expressing the intelligence which they have. Their abilities are being masked by this one problem. And so accommodations are really meant to sort of level that playing field out.
Let me give an example.
Okay.
So Sam came to me, and I'm using his name because he speaks about this and writes about it, so he doesn't mind.
Okay.
Sam came to me when he was like in the 7th or 8th grade, and he said, I really wish I could compete in the essay contest with the Museum of History that my brothers did.
Okay.
And I thought, well, I wonder. So I picked up the phone.
Yes.
And I told him, I said, hi, this is Melanie Young, and I'm a homeschool instructor, and I've got a student that has a learning disability. Would it be all right for him to dictate his essays? And they said, sure.
They didn't even hesitate.
No, they said, just make sure he does his own research,
mm-hmm.
and that you write down exactly what he says. And that year he won #1 in the state of North Carolina with his essay. And on the very difficult and challenging Christopher Crittenden State History Quiz, he was #1 in the state of North Carolina.
And see that, what a great thing for him. Not just a yay, I win,
everything for him.
but to be able to say, look, you can do so much. You are gifted, you are intelligent, you are bright, clever, and everything else. You just have this one little problem.
Right.
And we're dealing with that problem. And that, that makes getting the diagnosis and saying, and by the way, he has dyslexia, having that label, if you want to call it that, it's all worth it. When you understand it and can deal with it and can show, hey, this is an isolated thing in your life. So.
Because he was able to do as well as any other kid out there.
Right.
He just needed help with that one thing. And, for Samuel, it was several things that he needed help with.
Yeah.
But, so early testing can help you to get accommodations you need later. It also can help you know exactly where the problem is. Mm-hmm. And then you can intervene. You can get the Diane Craft materials. We have them on our site. Mm-hmm. If you go to raisingrealmen.com/shop and scroll down and click on Struggling Learners, we have all the materials that helped us on our site.
Yep.
And so you can get materials. You can address the problem. Like that brain integration therapy manual addressed his issue. It helped improve the situation.
Right.
Without destroying the gifts that God had given him as a part of his challenges.
Yeah.
And so early, I'd say by third grade, if they're not reading by that point and writing by that point, you probably ought to look at getting some extra help.
Okay. And what kind of help? All right. You say get help. Where would you go for help? And is there any place you ought to avoid?
Well, I would avoid the local public school. Mm-hmm. I recommend that you contact HSLDA, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, at hslda.org and click on Struggling Learners.
Yep.
Because they have a Struggling Learners department that is excellent with ladies that are experts in this. And you can ask them for help, and they can direct you to an educational psychologist who can do the testing, and they can give you advice about how to do accommodations and to help your child. Mm-hmm. They have tons of resources out there. If you're not a member of HSLDA, join them.
Yeah.
But once you're a member, you can click. They have a member site that just will help you tremendously.
Well, and there's so much of it that you can do. You don't have to have a PhD.
No.
You don't have to have a certification. You're doing things like with the Diane Craft. It was very, very much, it led you through it.
Well, when a mom told me recently, several moms have told me this recently at conferences, they said they looked at the books that we used and they said, oh my word, this is what I paid $7,000. One mom said $10,000. Another mom said for help at a clinic, but you can do it at home. So don't think you can't afford this. That book is $58. You can find out things you can do at home. I was afraid of that too. We have 8 children. And I thought, what if they tell me I need to drive to Raleigh every day to get him help? Mm-hmm. How can I possibly meet the needs of my other children? But I was able to get stuff that we could do at home and help him at home. Now, a lot of people, their child struggles come out in middle school. Mm-hmm. They find out we're just not it's not clicking right.
Okay.
That's another time a lot of people end up getting some intervention, getting some help like we did.
Yeah.
When I got Diane Craft's materials. Mm-hmm. One time I want to be sure to talk about, though, is high school. Because if you have a child who is entering high school and you've just been, he's been a struggling learner all along and you haven't been sure what to do or how to handle it.
Right.
Now's the time.
Do not delay.
Do not delay. You've got to get help now.
Yeah.
Because especially boys, and learning disabilities seem to show up more often in boys and girls, especially boys, the prime time for them academically is high school.
That's when just developmentally they seem to accelerate.
Yes.
So
they
that's
need
actually
to be ready for that.
That's where they close a lot of that gender gap.
The
girls just take to formal schoolwork so much easier, it seems, and then when they get to high school, the girls are at cruising speed, and that's where the boys accelerate and get up to catch up to them.
If they haven't lost their love of learning or lost their academic confidence. But if they come into high school feeling like there's no hope, I can't do this, then they're going to waste those most critical years.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. Do not assume that your struggling learner won't need all that stuff because they won't be doing anything past high school. Because Honestly, at 13 or 14, I was hoping I could teach our son enough to fill out an application at McDonald's.
Yeah, we weren't holding out great.
Yeah. At 17, he was reading ancient philosophers for fun. At 19, he was entering college as the top academic recruit for that college.
Wow. What a difference those few years can make.
And so, if you have a child entering high school, this is the situation with a friend. This is why I told our friend yesterday she needed to have her son tested.
Right. Because
he's obviously really bright. And he wants to go to college. I think he said he wants to study philosophy. And so I said, you need to have him tested because he needs to be able to get the help he needs to express his learning and to learn well. Like, some of the accommodations Samuel has gotten in college, well, like on the SAT, he got extra time because his processing speed was a little slower. He was able to dictate his essays.
Right.
He got some kids are able to get like larger print or someone to read them the questions. Yeah. Well, see, that even flows through in college. That at college he's able to get his books on recordings. They pay another student to take notes for him and nobody knows. The student turns in the notes to the Office of Disability Support Services. Yeah. And they give the notes to him. So, it doesn't even embarrass him.
Well, see, this is the result of a 4-word phrase, the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Yes, the ADA.
And honest to goodness, if you have a learning disability, ADA applies. And
it is a godsend.
And people will, people will jump to attention when you mention that because that's federal law and they know good and well.
And see, that's the real advantage of having a label. When you have a child, Hal, who does need extra help in order to succeed. Yeah. Because of the way our laws work, if you can say, I have a child who has a learning disability, bing, then they have to help you. Right. And we've seen that again and again, taking babysitting courses to college, that they help you and that allows these children to succeed. I have a friend who's also a speaker whose son just got his doctorate. And he is severely dyslexic and dysgraphic. But he's a very bright young man.
You know who else? Was? Nelson Rockefeller, the vice president under Gerald Ford back in the 70s. Yeah. Immensely dyslexic.
Really?
Yes, he was.
Well, George Patton, the general.
Oh, gracious. Yes, he was, indeed.
Yes. And so just because your child is a struggling learner does not mean they're not going to be a successful adult. In fact, there's a lot of super successful adults, the pinnacles of history, that struggled with these things, like Thomas Edison. Hal. Oh yeah. They sent him home from school and told his mother he would never be able to learn to read.
Well, a neat thing about some of these learning challenges is that when their brains are wired a little differently, sometimes they're gifted differently too. Yes. And I have heard over and over that most real talented sculptors have this struggle. They have this dyslexic thing seems to run with 3D manipulation ability. Yeah.
My brother, who's dyslexic, for a long time made his living doing CAD drawings for patent attorneys.
Yeah, he was a mechanical designer.
Yeah, but now he's a millionaire entrepreneur in China. Yep. So don't feel despair. Instead, get help. Yeah. Give them accommodations. Help them succeed. Don't be afraid, because see, the thing is, when you're a homeschooler, those test results don't have to go anywhere but to you. Those labels don't have to do anything but inform you until you need them. And then you can use them to get the help your child needs to do what God has called them to do in life.
Awesome. So do it. Yeah. Don't be afraid of it.
Don't be afraid. Get the help you need when you need it. And listen, I hope that you're going to see great success for that child.
Well, look, again, if you want some more information, we have some resources on our website at www.raisingrealmen.com/shop. Look under Struggling Learners. We have not only the dye and craft materials, but we have some other things that you might find interesting and helpful.
Including a workshop that Sam, our dyslexic son, and I do together, where we talk about some of the problems he faced and how you can help your child through those things.
That's a really neat one too.
It is.
And
it's good to listen to with your kid.
And also, we encourage you to stop by our sponsor, schoolhouseteachers.com. And if you really like this kind of stuff, if you like hearing things that are practical and useful and biblically based and so free, oh goodness, they are so cost-free on the internet, but somebody's got to pay bills, and we really would appreciate it if you'd become a sponsor and a patron too. Come out to patreon.com/Hal and Melanie. We would love to have you as part of our ministry support team.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so I think that probably wraps things up for this week, and we hope you'll join us every week as we talk about taking biblical truth into your family in a practical way. We are making biblical family life practical, and until next week, I'm Hal.
And I'm Melanie.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye, y'all.
You've been listening to Making Biblical Family Life Practical with Hal and Melanie Young. If you found this program interesting, challenging, and encouraging, why not join us on the web at halandmelanie.com. That's HALANDMELANIE.com. Or follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Facebook/Hal and Melanie or Facebook.com/RaisingRealMen. This program is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Join us next week when we'll be back to talk about making biblical family life practical. Until then, thank you and God bless you for listening.